I've always been driven by impact more than, financials. I'm not trying to, my main driver is not let's get as rich as I can. I wouldn't have chosen this pathway for sure. This is not the pathway.
It's a long road, yeah.
Yeah, this is a long road. Mine is how can I have the biggest impact? And it's not for an ego thing. It's not about me and my name. It's how can we build a business and have a great team to have as big an impact on the industry as we can to positively influence the planet, the people, everyone around, so that we're really working into the future. So that's really my driver. And so that's why I've shifted from building to unbuilding. I see it as an opportunity to not only build our great business, but also influence the industry. And I've heard from multiple architects and builders that our work with them and even just our presence is starting to help shift the thought of what are these materials and what does that building look like in 50 to 100 years when it comes to the end of its life or the end of its use. And for me, that's really exciting that unbuilding could start to actually influence the design side of things as well.
I was just going to say that because LEED was such a craze. Not a craze. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to trash the whole thing, but like there was a lot of money stuff involved in how that all came together.
Yeah.
Passive house then is and still is probably the current big thing.
Yeah.
Right. And you're saying now going for impact, and it does sound like, you stick with this and you go, it will probably start, like you're saying, influencing design and architect, or from the design point of view, which is the beginning of everything.
Yeah.
Right. So when you start to get there again, then you can rethink the process from the start to the end and the whole thing through. So kind of almost, do you see maybe this as the next progression of people's thought in terms of building?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of them. There's a big. I think the next 10 years in construction is going to see more innovation than the last 100. And the Pacific Northwest in particular, we're in a hot spot of innovation in construction, which is really exciting. I mean, even between SiteMax and when you look at Contech, but then also the real rise of prefabrication and not like modular homes like we're used to seeing like trailer parks, but really beautiful. High-end projects, big scale projects, prefabricated. I think that's a big move that we're right at the start of seeing. There's a lot of great companies evolving right now in this region on that side. Designed for disassembly and high performance. Like Passive House, I think LEED has it's done a lot of great things, which is it's made people start to really think about what materials, what products they're using, how do those go together. So I think LEED has served a really great purpose. I also think it's full of problems. As I mentioned, you can build with nice products and have horrible performance. Passive House is like the data speaks for itself. When you look at a Passive House building, Passive House is a terrible brand name for it because it actually works better on high rises, like the whole system. But it's science driven. I don't think Passive House is going anywhere. I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger and become more of the standard because the performance speaks for itself. And the added cost a lot of the time on passive houses is easily made up on the savings on your utility bills over 7 to 10 years. So yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere. At least the thinking behind it, it is scientifically driven, data driven. It makes complete sense, but it's now taking it to that next step that, okay, let's source good materials. Let's make sure that we're not doing things so that in 50 years, we have to smash this down anyways. And the next narrative that's already been talked about in Canadian building code, as well as code in the US, is looking at embodied carbon. So not only looking at the...
storage,
yeah. So not only just looking at how the building performs when it's operating, but what went into that building to build it, and also what happened to the old building that sat on that property.
Yeah.
What is the full life cycle of all of that embodied carbon and all of the products all along the way? And that's on the reclaimed wood and the material side. For our other business, that's really exciting for me. If we start putting embodied carbon calculations on new construction, then reclaimed materials are going to see a massive rise. And you kind of need both because there's municipalities that are mandating deconstruction. Well, if you do that and the demand for reclaimed wood and salvage materials doesn't increase, we're not really solving a problem because now you're just shipping materials to a yard to rot. So you really want to see both at the same time. And that's part of why we have the two companies, because you can't just focus on the deconstruction without focusing on where the materials go.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You said something that caught my ear: design for disassembly.
Yeah.
Now, we think of buildings when you build them that, they're 100-year buildings, right? Is there a point where, and this goes back to the embodied carbon conversation we had with George. He was showing examples of buildings around the world that didn't get demolished completely. One, they're in city centers and hauling them out from a cost perspective, and I appreciated this, from like the practicality of like a business case, hauling it all out from a city and then building from scratch again. There's things you could do with the building that was existing.
Yeah.
But design for disassembly, and this is just my curiosity, does that mean that buildings get designed not to not last longer, but that you could modify them easier down the road and build upon them again?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Either end of life, that, say you build a 3-story warehouse commercial building,
Yeah.
and in 50 years, that's going to be zoned residential. You can take that building apart and build a tower. Or it's an office tower, and in 20 years, everyone's working from home and offices aren't needed anymore, and you can adapt that into a condo building. So it's either or. But it's really thinking about, it's not building a building that's, less structurally
And not gonna
sound
last as
and not
long.
going to last. It's building it smart with the right fastening systems that it can come apart. And, when you look at how we build buildings in North America, especially residential buildings, stick frame homes, and you compare that to any other industry, it's totally insane. Like when you want to buy a new car, you don't hire a team of 5 mechanics. They show up in your driveway with some metal and some parts, and they just start building a car in your driveway. Well, that's the way we build houses. It's pretty crazy. And this is where I see prefabrication with a massive future, because it only makes sense. You can automate it. You can make it super efficient. You can actually reduce the number of workers you need, which in this market is needed because there's not enough people. Historically, that would be a bad thing because you're taking jobs, but there's not people to do the work. And so the way that we build buildings right now is pretty crazy. And so we need to see that shift, and we're seeing that shift, which is exciting. And same with the end of life. Like when your car comes to the end of its life, it doesn't just go into the dump. The car is broken apart. The components are broken apart. The metal is scrapped. The fabric gets taken out. The glass gets taken apart. It's the same way we have to treat buildings. So this is it only makes sense. Like it's just logical that this is where construction and deconstruction are going.